Hello and welcome. What you're about to see if you want to partake for sure is part one of a multi-part series of an integration between PBIS and Time In for Schools. Dr. Randall presents a 3-day in-service on Time In for Schools and how it relates to PBIS and how the two can work together to change the culture of a school. So with that being said, please enjoy. If you want further information on Time In for Schools, you can get that at the website timeinforschools.com. And at the end of this video, after the end of the presentation, the slides from the presentation that are kind of tough to see in the video will be there for your review. And this is just part one, like I said, of a multi-part. So if this is helpful for you, please leave a like, and let's enjoy the journey together.
Approached to say, can you come over and tell us about Time In? I was like, well, yes, I can, but I need to let you know that it's not a program, okay? And I know that I have very good friends, and I stay very connected to the academic world, and I know that very often when you're brought in this kind of situation, you're brought in to learn a program. And that's not what I'm doing. So, and that's not what I want to share with you. And actually, in the conversations I've had with those on the PBIS team and your administration and leadership, they're okay with it not being a program. They're okay with the fact that what we're looking at here is a process. So, we'll go to the next one. So, Time In, I don't believe is a word that we can define. It's sort of like mentoring. How do you take mentoring and define it? It is something you live and experience. And, you know, you initially start in by saying mentoring is taking some time to be with a student and maybe help them learn a subject matter. And that's actually how we engage volunteers into mentoring, because they're afraid of the bigger thing, which really mentoring becomes, which is a relationship with a child. And so for me, Time In isn't something I want to define, but more of an experience I want to share with you. And I see it not as a program, but as a philosophy of being. And with that, I have to say one of my favorite characters, although it's not, people wouldn't look at me and think I'm Winnie the Pooh because I'm more like Tigger, but one of my favorite characters is Winnie the Pooh because it's always about the moment and being in the moment, being present in the moment. And I'll tell you, I have 10 contracts in this county, and I'm only here 2 weeks out of the month. I'm on the East Coast, and I do a lot of different things, and so I have a lot going. But when I'm in presence with someone, I make a conscious effort to be present. And that's very important as part of this philosophy. And when it's embraced by a group or a culture, which is what I think we want to do here, should you all want to embrace it, is it becomes a culture. Okay, so when it's embraced by an entity or a group, it becomes a culture, a way. And you know, we use some words, you know, culture is a big word and lots of trainings now and stuff, but I don't want to use it in a way that's slight or just throwing out another term. It really is your essence of who you are and how you're defined. You know, outside you have the be safe, responsible, and respectful. I think those are, you know, that's your identity. Well, that's what I see as your culture. And the backdrop to that culture, I believe, because you care and because you are implementing in this school the PBIS concepts, I see you already on the Time In trajectory. I believe that that's what you're already doing. So I'm going to share with you a little bit about my journey to Time In so that you get a sense of where I'm coming from and maybe how it would align with what you're doing here. So I was trained in a very behavioristic and neuropsychological psychology graduate program that was based in a medical school. It was all about hardwiring. It was all about stimulus response. So it was, you see this, the brain is doing this, and this is how you respond. There were parts of that that I embraced in terms of maybe some strategy, but I didn't think it explained people. And my upbringing, my parents were immigrants, and you know, I didn't learn English until I went to school, and there's all kinds of things that impacted how I saw the world and my faith and experiences and so forth, and how I'd seen people change in life. I hadn't seen them change just by a stimulus response behavioral program. And so it didn't quite mesh with me, and I thought, okay, I love the profession I chose, but I'm not sure I'm aligned with all of its theory, and so forth. But fortunately, we've evolved over time. So then I went to college, and in college I did the honors program, and I decided to embed myself into what I thought was more of, so this was prior to going to grad school, more what I thought life might be more like. And so I decided to focus on what's called social support. The fact that we're here together and we support each other in a social network, social support. And I wanted to know how does social support and our characters work together. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that at the end, because it's very much a part of what I see as time in, that we all have support systems that are broad. But when we need help, when we're challenged, when we're struggling at school, there might be certain aspects of support that are more important to us than others, or that we really need at the moment, depending on the etiology of that concern. But that's where, then, of course, my passion became working with infants and very young children. So I worked with Dr. T. Brambleton. Some of you are too young to know who he is. But he was one of the main pediatricians of the time that took and said, an infant has capability. An infant already has structure that allows you to predict or to understand what needs to be done to have a healthy trajectory, and that there is a lot there. So all the work now, and 20 years ago, if you said infant mental health, a lot of people wouldn't really know what that was. So actually, when I went into my career, I said, okay, so I went from teaching to pre-med psychology. I like a variety of things. So I went into psychology, and then I specialized in infant work. And my family and my family's friends and everyone saying, well, you're a psychologist, though. They don't talk. What are you going to do with... But in fact, all the talking, all the understanding of where the trajectory of a child will go happens in infancy, happens from birth on, and it happens to explain why they behave the way they do often in your classroom. And so to me it was amazing, because infant mental health, as opposed to most other psychology or mental health, was attachment-based. We understood that attachment was the key to relationship, right? Being in connection, in time in, was the key to mental health and well-being in an infant. So why did we throw it out the window just because you became a terrible twos, you know? So, and then on from there. So, and then I've had the privilege of, I started getting into prevention work, high-risk youth, how do we prevent? The international crisis of the time, and still has some of that, was HIV/AIDS. So really my work was on how do we prevent young people from developing AIDS, okay? Which is really high-risk behavior prevention. You want them to not engage in high-risk behaviors and then contract the disease. And so what struck me as I did, and I have had the privilege of presenting that work in over 40 countries, and what struck me as a theme throughout that was that everywhere I went, what people resonated with, what we understood for prevention, for being there for our young people, for making sure they met their potential, for keeping them on task, was that we needed to spend time with them. Okay? That time in was the prevention strategy. And time in is what children need from us. And so I thought it was interesting that people paid me to travel around the world to tell them to spend time with their kids. You know? And it just, the thing is, it sounds easy, but relationship is the hardest thing in the world to do. You might look at a curriculum and say, gosh, how am I going to get through these 30 lessons or constructs of math or English in the next 10 weeks or whatever your curriculum base relates to. But you know strategies for that, and you're going to find a way on this day I'm going to do this. Relationship doesn't have that linear format. It doesn't have where you can say, now you could say, I'm going to check in, and PBIS has that in some of its constructs, check in at the beginning of class. It's already shown in the literature that if you check in at the beginning, the rest of class seems to do better, right? So you already have some of those. But time in, that process of just making connection and being there as a relational being doesn't cost us money, but it's the most expensive thing because it requires us. It requires your soul. It requires you. And sometimes, and I do, when I teach my students who want to become psychologists and they're in graduate school, I said, be careful about your motivation for the career you choose. Because if you're choosing it, and you guys are going to laugh at this, but if you're choosing it because you want the kids to validate you and to say how great you are and thank you so much, you'll burn out pretty quick, right? Right? Okay? We know that that's a part of the thing. And it happens, and when it happens, it's a beautiful thing, right? When a student is appreciative, it's beautiful. But we have to be the older, the wiser, and realize we're not getting validated. Our gift of us is to them, right? And how the gift of us is accepted or taken is not cheapened by the response. That's an important construct in what you do, because you do burn out. If you don't remember that the gift of you, the ability to give time in, to connect with those students, to do on their behalf what you see as best, not only for learning, but for their trajectory in life, that gift isn't cheapened by the response. Okay? Sometimes we don't know how to give that gift as well, and that's why we support each other. And that's why, as a process of time in, this isn't just time in you with the student, this is time in you with each other, that you support each other in those kinds of things. So that becomes an important part of this. So then I actually went and did more training in Gestalt work, and so you see a little bit of that, which is more about not only the content of what people say and do, but it's what they focus on, where they present their time, and how their body responds to that, and neurobehavior. So I'm going to talk in a little bit about the contact cycle as being an important part of time in, because there is a way that we relate to each other that becomes really important. So there's two constructs that I want to talk about that have really affected my journey in what time is and how time in is and how that is. And there's one is procedural memory. Okay. So we're going to just do the theory of memory for just a second. Tolving is the theory I'm going to use, and he's one of the primary theorists that we use, and he's a Russian psychologist who looked at memory, and he said we have three kinds of memory. Okay, so we have episodic memory, an episode. Have you ever been? Have you ever done? Were you ever somewhere? So it's what you're looking at for recognition when you're doing a test. Do you recognize this, right? So have you ever been to Pinion Mason Mills? Yes, I have. I have that in my recognition. I can say I've done it, okay? The second one is semantic. It's a feeling or associative memory, okay? So that is, yes, I have been, and when I'm there, I met really great people who are doing something on behalf of kids. And so I have a feeling associated with it. Sometimes you smell something and it reminds you like of your mom's or grandma's kitchen or, something like that. But that's semantic memory. It's associative. You make a thing. Those are both in our awareness right there, ready for recognition and recall. The memory that you struggle with the students in class that are struggling, is procedural memory. And procedural memory is your automatic, reflexive way of responding to your world. Okay? So it's that out of your awareness, if somebody does this, I react like this. Or in order to get my needs met, I need to do this. These are things that happen outside of your awareness because they are laid down very early on in life. Okay, so think about an infant who has a baby. There was no good back and forth of somebody understanding the baby language. We call them baby cues, right? To say I'm hungry, or I'm tired, or I need a diaper change. There was no consistency in that. So the infant had to escalate to distress to have infant needs met. Guess what's happening in your classroom? If I have a need that's going to be needing to be met, I'm going straight there, right? Because that works. And you know what? they'll get validated for it, right? Because the kid who's escalating is the one but that's a natural thing. You have to look at the kid who's escalating in the classroom. But what we're revalidating there is that same procedural memory is for me to get, so what we have to do then is with those kids is we have to think of strategies that allow us to maybe catch those cues earlier so that they don't have to go to distress. The problem is with some of our kids who live in chaos and trauma, they don't have precursor strategies. They go pretty quickly. So then we have to support each other, and how do we handle that particular thing? So I call it procedural memory. Those of you, how many of you have ever heard of Dr. Bruce Perry? None of you? Actually, those of you who are interested in how the brain reacts to trauma, particularly if you have some kids that you're really thinking about, he's the #1 trauma psychologist in the United States and even in Canada, and very internationally known, doing a lot of work internationally. And he talks about it as templates. Okay, so I'm going to actually move to that. Okay, so templates means that the patterns of experiences. So every time I do this and I get upset or I create chaos, I get this reaction. That's my pattern of experience. And so these patterns of experience, when they happen over and over and over again, and it comes into memory, it matters. And the more a system or a connection in brain is activated, the more the system will do it. So you know our brain is electrical, and so our synapses, you know how all that works, right? And so if we're always having a similar pathway in the brain, I bite my brother, and so then I get attention, well I get time out, but then everything's okay and my mom rewards me with ice cream, okay, because now I'm a good boy, right? So if that pattern happens consistently that same way all the time, guess what? That becomes a template in my brain. So now I bite the kid in the classroom, I'm expecting this same pattern. So while it was adaptive to me here, it's maladaptive there, but it's my procedural memory, so I'm going to continually try to do that. Now what happens is, what if we reinforce that by one time saying, oh, here, I'm sorry that you're distressed, and so we follow that same pattern, is variable reinforcement. What do we know about variable reinforcement if we're not consistent?
It's stronger.
It's stronger. It is the hardest to extinguish. And do you know who knows that the best? Do you know what entity uses, well, kids do, but do you know what entity uses that strategy? Gambling. That's the Las Vegas strategy. Because you're going to do it, and you're not going to get your way, and you're not going to get your way, but you know, every now and then, by random, there's going to be a give-in and a payout. And those are the patterns that often happens in parenting, and then when they're happening in the classroom, you're validating that same template and pattern. And so what happens is, it becomes solid. I'm going to keep pushing your buttons, and I don't care if I pushed your buttons 20 times last time, I got it. Right? So that's where we're going to talk about consistency and stuff. But these patterns happen. So a pattern, repetitive activity, something that happens over and over, creates a template, and they become so ingrained that the brain habituates to them, and they happen out of awareness. They are just there. Now, isn't it wonderful when those are ingrained early in life in a healthy way, right? Because then they come in your classroom and they know when you say, well, take your book out and look and focus, they can do that. But sadly, many of our children don't have those patterns of experience, that what's said means something relational, means helpful, do it, and I'll help you if you don't understand. I'll tell you, working with the foster care system, and foster parents all the time come in and say, I don't understand, my child's always creating chaos. Right? You got it, right? In your classroom, you got something. But guess what? What is their homeostasis? You know what homeostasis means? Where do they know how to live and function? In chaos. So if your classroom doesn't have it, they don't know how to exist. So they have to create the chaos to create their own homeostasis and equilibrium. Okay? So you're just looking at, whoa. So Dr. Perry wrote a book called The Boy Who Was Raised as a Dog. And each story in the book is about a child whose neurobehavioral templates have been impacted. It helps you understand. Now, it's from a trauma perspective, but it helps you understand how these things are laid down. And he gives an example of Sally, who's, I think, 4.5 or 5. And he's going in as a resident. One of his first cases in psychiatry, he's going in as a resident. And, you know, it's just him and the little 4.5-year-old. And she comes over to him to start doing sexual behaviors with him. And so you think, oh, what a horrible little, no. What she knows is that she was given by her mother to men, and every time she's alone with a man, that happens. So if she just goes with it, there's less pain, there's less hurt, there's less this. So her pattern is that. Okay? Now you might think, what a bad little girl doing all of those sorts of things. No, that's the pattern she's learned to survive. And that's a very sick, horrible example. But we could take that probably to several kids in your classroom and say that pattern of chaos, that pattern of pushing your button is how they know how to survive in their world. I was a psychologist, a school psychologist in a juvenile correctional facility for quite a while. And I'll tell you, those kids, you know, when I tried to say, hey, let's change this up here. I mean, do you see how you get in trouble when that happens? They're like, no, because when we go out in the real world, if we just be the nice guy, we're going to get hurt, right? So we can't develop those patterns. We can't develop, because that's not going to be good for me in my world. So even if it's conscious or not, some of these kids are holding on to these misbehaviors, these maladaptive things, because they think it's important for their survival. But a child who needs to act out to have their needs and wants met, or has to do a misbehavior to have their needs and wants met, do you think that will change just walking in the classroom? No. It is out of even their awareness that those are the strategies that they use. It is a responsive, reflexive way. And I say this not to excuse behavior, okay? Because I don't believe it. I say it to understand it so that we know better how to change it. Okay? And I'm going to say this at the end too. What developed those behaviors? How did these develop? How did these behaviors develop? Through what?
Repetition.
Repetition in what? Relationship. Right? They developed in relationship. So guess what? You can do a little behavioral thing. You can do a little medication. You can do all things. But guess the only thing that's going to change your neural regeneration is what? Relationship. And I'll tell you, some of these kids have never, ever had routine and structure and caring the way that you can have it in a classroom. It's going to be new. They're going to push all kinds of things to live in this world. Even if they don't like it, it's what they know. And they can't probably articulate it to you. But you have the opportunity not only to change templates, to build ones that are healthy. But it requires a lot from us. So I'm supposed to do something else. Okay. So, procedurals laid down in infancy and childhood are significant throughout life. I wrote an article with a colleague in a journal where we talked about the fact that when we're working with people, just remember that the procedural memories, those habitual, so if when I was young, I was always told I was stupid and I wouldn't amount to anything. Those procedural memories laid down in my early childhood are significant throughout my life, and they will influence how I think about myself in the world, they will influence my behaviors, they will influence my emotions and my relationships. Now, let's get out of the student-teacher world for a minute and just think about your friends, colleagues and friends. You have some friends that you go, I don't know why he or she always is with that kind of person. They know it's not good for them, right? Those are procedural memories laid down to say, this is what I can handle, this is what I'm worth, this kind of relationship, right? So that's what, and this is most specifically seen in early attachment, and we're going to talk about that. That the things that you're dealing with were laid down very early. So The thing that we need to understand from this is that procedural memories will impact the classroom, and we can go to the next slide, but that there are things that we can do about it.
Okay, this concludes part 1 of our Time In for Schools and PBIS in service with Dr. Randall. Slides from this presentation will follow. Next time in part 2, we will start with the child's deep need for connectedness. As you can see, there is a great connection between PBIS and Time In for Schools. We hope you enjoyed this. Leave us a like. Stay tuned for part 2.